I exposed my cheating husband at our anniversary dinner. You won't believe what happened. Have you ever suspected your husband of cheating? In today's video, I'm going to share the shocking moment I discovered my cheating husband's betrayal and how I took matters into my own hands. Watch the whole story unfold, from the emotional shock to the ultimate revenge. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel, Stories TH, for more empowering stories and advice on dealing with betrayal. Grace sat at the candlelit table, her hands folded tightly in her lap, trying to suppress the gnawing anxiety clawing at her stomach. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, 6 years of marriage, 6 years of building a life together. She had dressed carefully, choosing the navy blue dress Logan once said made her eyes sparkle, hoping to rekindle a flicker of what they had once shared. But deep inside, a voice whispered warning she refused to listen to. Not tonight, she told herself. Tonight will be different. The restaurant buzzed with a low hum of conversation and clinking glasses. The golden light cast a romantic glow on the white linen tablecloths. Grace glanced across the table at Logan. He looked calm, almost smug, tapping his fingers idly against his champagne flute. A strange, nervous energy crackled around him, but Grace chalked it up to anticipation. Maybe he had planned something special, something to remind them both why they had chosen each other. As the waiter poured champagne into their glasses, Logan rose to his feet, drawing the attention of not only Grace, but also nearby diners. Her heart fluttered, a mixture of hope and fear battling in her chest. This is it, she thought. He's going to say something beautiful, something to make all the distance and coldness of the past year melt away. Logan raised his glass high, his voice cutting through the gentle murmur of the restaurant. To 6 years of marriage, he began, and Grace felt a cautious smile tug at her lips. And to being free, single, and searching. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. The words hung in the air, heavy and cruel, as a stunned silence rippled through the room. Grace felt the blood drain from her face. She blinked, wondering if she had misheard. Surely this was some kind of joke. But Logan's smirk, so self-satisfied, so heartless, told her otherwise. The champagne glass trembled in her hand. A hollow ringing filled her ears, drowning out the soft background music. Across the table, Logan's parents, Patricia and Donald, raised their glasses in mocking solidarity. Patricia's sharp eyes glittered with glee, while Donald's lips curled into a cruel, knowing smile. As Grace sat frozen, Logan reached under the table and, with a flourish that felt grotesquely theatrical, produced a gift-wrapped box. "Open it, honey," he coaxed, his voice dripping with false sweetness. Her fingers, numb and shaking, lifted the lid. Inside lay a neatly folded black t-shirt. As she unfolded it, bold white letters screamed back at her, 6 years of disappointment. A collective gasp rippled through the restaurant. Diners turned in their seats, craning their necks to witness the unfolding scene. The weight of 100 curious eyes pressed down on Grace, suffocating her. Shock anchored her to her chair. This couldn't be happening. This had to be a nightmare she would wake up from any moment. But the smug glint in Logan's eyes, the delighted sneer on Patricia's face, they were all too real. Memories flooded her mind in a dizzying rush, late nights waiting up for Logan. The empty excuses, the growing distance, the gut-deep loneliness she had fought so hard to deny. All the time she had told herself he was just busy, just stressed, just tired. Lies. Lies she had fed herself because the truth was too painful to face. The betrayal stung sharper than any blade. This public spectacle, orchestrated to humiliate her, was the final confirmation of what her heart had tried so hard to ignore. Logan hadn't just fallen out of love with her. He despised her. Tears burned at the edges of her vision, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not now. Not in front of him. 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind. Should she scream? Should she throw the champagne in his smug face? Should she run? Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear Logan's mock invitation. Speechless. "Honey, come on, say something." Grace stood slowly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. Every eye in the restaurant fixed on her. She felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath her feet. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her throat tightened with the force of everything she wanted to scream: the betrayal, the heartbreak, the years wasted. Instead, she drew a shuddering breath and placed the t-shirt carefully back in the box. "Thank you, Logan," she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to choke her. "You've given me the clarity I needed." For a moment, Logan's smirk faltered, confusion flickering in his eyes. Without another word, Grace lifted her chin and walked out of the restaurant, leaving the stunned whispers and judgmental stares in her wake. She didn't look back. She wouldn't give him or his parents the satisfaction. The cool night air hit her like a slap, but it was a welcome one. It woke her from the nightmare she had been sleepwalking through for far too long. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she stumbled toward her car. But they weren't just tears of sorrow. They were tears of release, of liberation. Grace sat behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands. Her entire body trembled. How had it come to this? How had she allowed herself to be reduced to a punchline at her own anniversary dinner? But amid the overwhelming sadness, a spark ignited. A spark of anger, of self-respect, of determination. Logan wanted to be free? Fine. He could have his freedom. But she would have hers too, on her terms, with her dignity intact. Grace wiped her tears with the back of her hand, started the engine, and drove into the night, away from the wreckage of the life she thought she had, towards something unknown, terrifying, and thrilling, a future she would build for herself, piece by piece. And as she drove, a single thought rang clear in her mind. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning. Grace sat by the window, her fingers tracing idle patterns on the cool glass as memories flooded her mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. Outside, the world moved on, cars passing, people laughing, life thriving, but inside, Grace felt like she was trapped in a slow, silent collapse. She remembered the first time she truly noticed the distance. It had been subtle, almost easy to dismiss. Logan had started coming home late from work more often. At first, it was understandable. Big projects, tight deadlines, excuses that made sense. She had believed him, or rather, she had wanted to believe him. Love made you blind to things you didn't want to see. Then there was the cologne. Not the familiar scent she used to bury her face into when they hugged, but something sharper, more exotic. She had noticed it clinging to his shirts late one night as he slipped quietly into bed, careful not to wake her. When she mentioned it casually the next morning, Logan had brushed it off, muttering something about a coworker's perfume lingering in the air at the office. She had nodded, laughed even, convincing herself it was harmless. But the cracks kept forming. Conversations that once flowed so easily became short, transactional. They discussed grocery lists and utility bills, but never dreams or fears or silly things that once made them both laugh until they cried. Text messages were no longer sweet check-ins during the day. They became cold reminders about appointments and errands. The intimacy that had once been the heartbeat of their relationship faded into a memory, replaced by quick, perfunctory kisses and hollow goodnights. Grace remembered Sunday mornings most vividly. They had once been sacred slow breakfasts in their pajamas, pancakes made too big to flip, teasing and laughter filling the sun-drenched kitchen. But over time, Logan's Sundays became booked. Golf with his father. Networking brunches she was never invited to attend. Left alone in the too-quiet house, Grace found herself talking aloud just to fill the silence. There had been warning signs everywhere, flashing like bright neon, but she had turned her head, desperate to preserve the life they had built. She had blamed herself. Maybe she wasn't interesting enough anymore. Maybe she wasn't pretty enough. Maybe she just needed to be more understanding. She clung to every tiny breadcrumb of affection Logan tossed her way, convincing herself that love meant enduring rough patches. It wasn't just the physical absence that hurt. It was the emotional chasm that grew wider by the day. The way Logan's eyes glazed over when she spoke about her day. The way he sat across from her at dinner, more engaged with the screen of his phone than with her voice. The way he recoiled, almost imperceptibly, when she reached for his hand in bed. Grace remembered one night, 3 months ago, when she had finally worked up the courage to ask if everything was okay. She had stood in the bedroom doorway, watching him knot his tie with mechanical precision, his reflection cold and distant in the mirror. "Working late again?" she had asked softly, hope clinging to her words like a drowning man to driftwood. "Big client," he had replied without looking at her. "Don't wait up." He hadn't kissed her goodbye. He hadn't even met her eyes. The loneliness was crushing, but Grace wore it like armor, convincing herself it was normal, temporary, survivable. It wasn't. Sitting there by the window now, Grace realized how much she had lied to herself, how she had painted over the cracks with fragile hope, refusing to admit that the foundation of their marriage was crumbling beneath her feet. A lump rose in her throat as she thought back to their last vacation together, a weekend trip to the mountains that had once been a place of magic for them. She remembered hiking the trails, laughing as they stumbled over tree roots, sharing secrets by the fire at night. But this last trip had been different. Logan had spent more time on his phone than looking at the mountains. When she reached for his hand during a sunset they once would have marveled at together, he pulled away, pretending to adjust his jacket. That moment, so small, so devastating, should have told her everything. But Grace hadn't wanted to see. She hadn't wanted to believe that the man she loved was slipping away, that he was becoming a stranger she couldn't reach. Now, with the painful clarity only hindsight brings, she saw it all. The distance hadn't appeared overnight. It had crept in slowly, like ivy wrapping around a house, until one day she woke up to find herself completely alone, even when he sat right beside her. A heavy sadness settled over her, deeper than anger, deeper than betrayal. It was the grief of losing something precious, not all at once, but piece by piece, until there was nothing left but memories and an aching emptiness. The saddest part, Grace realized, wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was how long she had fought to ignore it, how much of herself she had lost trying to hold on to someone who had already let go. She pressed her forehead against the glass, the cold seeping into her skin, grounding her in the painful truth. Logan hadn't just fallen out of love with her. He had abandoned her long before the public humiliation at their anniversary dinner. That night wasn't the beginning of the end. It was merely the final, brutal confirmation of an ending that had been unfolding all along. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day where you expect nothing and everything changes. Grace was doing laundry, just like she always did, mindlessly sorting clothes in neat piles, darks, lights, whites. Logan's slacks were crumpled at the top of the hamper, still carrying the faint scent of that new cologne she hated but dared not comment on. She shook them out, checking the pockets out of habit, when a crumpled piece of paper fluttered to the floor. She almost ignored it, almost tossed it straight into the trash. But something, maybe a whisper of intuition, maybe the raw nerves still lingering from their disastrous anniversary dinner, made her pick it up instead. She smoothed the damp paper between her fingers, frowning. It was a receipt printed on cheap thermal paper. A local custom printing shop. Her eyes flicked down to the item description, and her stomach twisted violently. Black t-shirt, white lettering. 6 years of disappointment. The room seemed to tilt around her. Grace read the words once, twice, a third time, as if repetition would somehow change them, would somehow reveal this to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. But the meaning was clear, undeniable, and it struck her with the cold, brutal force of a punch to the gut. The date on the receipt was 3 weeks ago, the same night Logan had claimed he was working late, that big client he couldn't name, the one he said had kept him chained to his office desk until midnight. The floor felt unsteady under her feet. She sat down hard on the laundry room floor, surrounded by piles of dirty clothes and a life unraveling at the seams. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment cruelty at the restaurant. It had been planned, carefully, lovingly, almost in the sickest way possible. He had thought about it, designed it, paid for it, all while she was at home making dinner, folding his shirts, believing that somehow they could still fix what was broken between them. A sick, hollow laugh bubbled up in her throat. She pressed her hand against her mouth, forcing it down. How long had he been planning to humiliate her? How long had she been the fool, the dutiful wife, trying to salvage something that had already been condemned to burn? Grace's hands shook so badly she almost dropped the receipt. The walls of the laundry room seemed to close in around her, suffocating, heavy. Panic tightened its grip on her chest, making each breath a shallow struggle. She thought back to every awkward silence, every distracted look, every fake smile Logan had thrown her way these past months. All of it a performance, a lie. Her mind raced wild, terrified thoughts spiraling out of control. If he had planned this, what else had he planned? Was he going to leave her? Had he already emptied their accounts, changed the locks, told his parents to celebrate his new freedom, while she stood there, clueless and broken? The realization was paralyzing. She wasn't just unloved. She was disposable, a joke, a spectacle to be paraded and discarded. The betrayal wasn't passive. It was active. It was gleeful. Grace clutched the receipt tighter until the edges bit into her palm. The tiny pain grounded her for a moment, kept her from completely unraveling. She had loved Logan. God help her. She had loved him with a sincerity that now felt pitiful. She had fought for their marriage while he was plotting her public execution. And the worst part? She had trusted him. Even after the silences, the secrets, the coldness, she had believed, somehow, that love could find a way back. A bitter, broken laugh escaped her lips. Not anymore. The horror of the setup was crushing, but even more terrifying was the unknown. What else was he capable of? If he could humiliate her this way, orchestrate her downfall with such precision and cruelty, what would he do next? Would he smear her reputation? Cut her off financially? Would he and his venomous parents find new ways to strip her of her dignity? Piece by piece, an overwhelming sense of dread settled over her. She couldn't stay passive. She couldn't hope for kindness from a man who had taken such pleasure in her pain. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war. Grace rose slowly from the floor, her legs stiff and trembling, the receipt clutched like a weapon in her fist. Her heart thundered in her chest, but not with fear anymore. Fear had burned away, leaving something colder, sharper in its place. Resolve. The man she thought she married was gone, if he had ever truly existed at all. And the person she had been the hopeful, trusting wife, she was gone too. Grace slipped the receipt into her purse, her mind already racing ahead, planning. She would gather every piece of evidence, protect what she could, prepare for the storm she now knew was coming. She would not go quietly. If Logan wanted a war, he had just declared it. And Grace, heartbroken and terrified, but no longer naive, was ready to fight. The little cafe near Grace's office had become her refuge, a tiny bubble of normalcy in a life that felt increasingly off balance. The smell of fresh coffee, the clink of cups, the quiet murmur of strangers, it was easier to breathe there, away from the cold silence of her home. She was halfway through a latte one overcast afternoon when Sophie, the young waitress who always seemed to have a knowing smile, approached her table. "Rough day?" Sophie asked, setting down a fresh napkin. Grace chuckled humorlessly, swirling the foam in her cup with a stir stick. "Rough year," she admitted, surprising herself at the honesty. Sophie hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if checking to see if anyone was listening. Then, lowering her voice, she said, "Your last name wouldn't happen to be Collins, would it?" Grace blinked, her stomach flipping. "It is." "Why?" Sophie leaned in, speaking just above a whisper. "I work weekends at Vincenzo's. Your in-laws Patricia and Donald, they're regulars there." The mention of Vincenzo's, the same restaurant where Logan had humiliated her, sent a bolt of cold dread down Grace's spine. "I've overheard some conversations," Sophie continued carefully. "Conversations about you. And they weren't kind." Grace's fingers tightened around her cup until her knuckles turned white. "What kind of conversations?" The young waitress looked uncomfortable, torn between professional discretion and human decency. "It's not really my place," she said, but then her gaze softened. "But if it were me, I'd want to know." Grace nodded, her heart hammering in her chest. "Please, I need to know." Sophie took a breath. They would come in, Logan too sometimes, and they'd talk about planning something for your anniversary. But it wasn't something nice. It sounded cruel. They were excited about it. Grace felt her world tilt again. The betrayal wasn't just Logan's, it was a family project. A gleeful, malicious conspiracy. There was another woman, too, Sophie added, her voice dropping even lower. She'd sometimes be with Patricia and Donald. Never when Logan was there, though. Blonde. About mid-30s. Always dressed like she just walked off a runway. Grace's mouth went dry. Did they ever say her name? Sophie nodded. They called her Diane. Diane, Patricia's personal assistant. The woman Grace had thought of as harmless. Almost invisible, just another one of Patricia's accessories. The pieces slammed into place with brutal clarity. The sudden distance. The lies about working late. The cologne. The extravagant networking Sundays. Grace felt sick. Are you sure? She whispered, needing to hear it again, even as her body rejected the information. Sophie nodded gravely. I wouldn't have said anything, but it sounded cruel. Like they were planning to hurt you, not just leave you. The room seemed to close in on Grace. She could barely breathe, her heart pounding in her ears. Thank you, she managed to say, her voice raw. Sophie gave her a small, sad smile. Be careful, okay? Grace nodded numbly, watching the waitress disappear into the crowd of customers. She sat there for a long time, the weight of the revelation pressing down on her chest like an iron hand. It was worse than she thought. Logan hadn't just grown bored. He hadn't just cheated. He and his parents had plotted to destroy her, to publicly humiliate her, to replace her, and to make it look like it was her fault. The idea that Patricia and Donald, the people she had tried so hard to win over, the people she had cooked for and smiled at through gritted teeth at endless country club events, could be so cold, so calculating it made her skin crawl. And Diane, the supposed assistant, had been groomed to take her place all along. Grace's mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Had Logan ever really loved her? Had her marriage been a lie from the start? Curiosity burned inside her, twisted with fury and heartache. She needed answers. She needed proof. Grace took a shaky breath and pulled out her phone. She started scrolling through her credit card statements, looking for dinners she hadn't attended, hotel stays she hadn't known about. Her fingers moved faster and faster as she uncovered more and more evidence of betrayal hidden in plain sight. The dread grew with every transaction she found. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Grace sat at the kitchen table, a legal pad in front of her, her laptop open and glowing in the dim light. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that feels oppressive rather than peaceful. She sipped cold coffee, her hands trembling slightly, as she logged into their joint bank account. It was time to stop pretending. It was time to know. The numbers on the screen blinked back at her innocently, but something immediately felt wrong. She clicked through recent transactions, her heart pounding harder with each line she read. Withdrawals. Small amounts at first, a few $100s here, 1,000 there. Just enough to seem ordinary, like bills or repairs. But when she traced the pattern over months, the total was staggering. Tens of thousands of dollars had disappeared, siphoned quietly out of their shared life like blood from a wound. Grace's chest tightened. She checked the recipient account, a personal account under Logan's name, one she hadn't even known existed. The betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore, it was financial, calculated, methodical. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she opened a second browser tab and pulled up credit card statements. She scanned through line after line of expenses, hotel stays in their own city, restaurants she had never been to, jewelry stores where no gifts had ever materialized in her hands. The anger that had been simmering for days boiled over. She clicked faster now, adrenaline surging through her veins, hunting for more proof. She had to see it all no matter how much it hurt. Buried deep in Logan's desk drawer, Grace found a second device she hadn't known existed, a cheap, prepaid burner phone. Her fingers shook as she scrolled through the messages. Hundreds of texts between Logan and someone saved under the initial D. Her stomach dropped. Diane. Every line she read twisted the knife deeper. They weren't just having an affair, they were building a future together. Laughing about Grace, mocking her cooking, her desperation, her hope. She still thinks we're celebrating their anniversary. One message read, followed by a string of laughing emojis. Another text from Diane chilled Grace to her bones. Make it a night she'll never forget, winking face. The tears welled up, hot and blinding, but she refused to let them fall. Not now. The scope of the betrayal was breathtaking. Logan hadn't simply drifted away from her, he had plotted her destruction, one cruel move at a time. Grace felt her hands curl into fists. Her whole body was trembling, not just with heartbreak, but with rage. Deep, bone-deep rage at how he had stolen not just her love, but her trust, her dignity, her sense of safety. And yet, beneath the anger, fear crept in. If Logan was willing to plan her public humiliation, to siphon off their savings in secret, to mock her so callously behind her back, what else was he capable of? How far would he go to get what he wanted? Was she even safe living under the same roof with him now? The thought paralyzed her for a long, heart-pounding moment. But then something hardened inside her. The woman who had believed in fairy tales, who had made excuses for late nights and cold shoulders, was gone. In her place stood someone who would not go quietly. Grace carefully photographed every bank transaction, every hotel receipt, every text message. She created a secret folder on a flash drive and tucked it into her purse. If Logan wanted a fight, she would make sure she had the ammunition to protect herself. This wasn't just about heartbreak anymore. It was survival. She glanced around the house she had made a home, and realized she could no longer afford to see it that way. It was just a battleground now, filled with landmines she would have to navigate until she could escape. A cold, methodical calm settled over her. She would bide her time. She would gather her strength. She would plan. Logan thought he had written the script for how this would end. Grace intended to tear it apart page by page. Grace sat rigidly in the sleek leather chair, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. Across from her sat Sarah Reeves, a divorce attorney with a reputation for being as tough as they came, the kind of woman who didn't flinch at dirty tricks or high-stakes battles. Her sharp eyes scanned the neatly organized file Grace had handed over, printouts of bank transfers, credit card charges, hotel receipts, and screenshots of text messages. For once, Grace didn't feel like a victim. She felt like a woman arming herself for war. When Sarah finally looked up, her face was calm but serious. "You're doing the right thing by coming to me now," she said, "before Logan realizes you know anything." Grace nodded stiffly, clutching her purse in her lap like a lifeline. "He's been moving money without your consent," Sarah continued, flipping through the documents. "That's significant. And the burner phone texts. Well, let's just say judges don't look kindly on spouses who mock their partners while plotting to abandon them." A tiny ember of hope flickered in Grace's chest. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't overreacting. Everything she felt, the betrayal, the injustice, was real. And it mattered. Sarah leaned forward, her voice low and deliberate. "First step, protect yourself financially. You need to separate your assets quietly and legally before Logan makes another move. We'll document everything so when the time comes, it's clear you acted within your rights." Grace swallowed hard, the fear tightening around her ribs loosening just a little. "I don't want to do anything illegal," she said. "You won't," Sarah assured her. "You're not hiding assets. You're preserving what's rightfully yours." They spent the next hour sketching out a plan. Grace would open a separate bank account in her name only and transfer her inheritance from her grandmother, which was considered separate property under the law. She would also move half of the funds remaining in their joint accounts, an amount she was legally entitled to, into a secure account. "You need to act normal," Sarah warned. "No arguments. No tipping him off. Play the role of the oblivious wife a little longer. Timing will be everything." Grace left the attorney's office feeling different than when she had walked in, heavier with responsibility. Yes, but lighter somehow too. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, she had a plan. A way forward. She wasn't just reacting to Logan's cruelty anymore. She was fighting back. The next morning, Grace put her plan into motion. Sitting in a different bank, she opened a new account under her maiden name. Signing the papers, she felt a strange surge of power rush through her, as if each stroke of the pen was reclaiming a piece of herself she hadn't even realized she'd lost. She carefully transferred half the funds from the joint savings, watching the confirmation screen blink, transaction completed, with a finality that made her breath hitch. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about control she refused to let Logan strip away. Later that evening, Grace casually mentioned joining a book club to explain her coming absences. Logan barely looked up from his phone, mumbling an indifferent, "Sounds good." It stung, that total disinterest, but at least it meant he wasn't suspicious. While Logan's back was turned, she also began gathering personal items. Jewelry she had inherited, important documents, photographs too precious to leave behind. Each item, tucked away into a hidden duffel bag, felt like a secret promise to herself. "I will survive this. I will win this." She forwarded essential mail to a new post office box, changed the passwords on her personal accounts, reviewed the contents of their safe, and photographed everything for future reference. It wasn't just practical steps, it was psychological armor. Every action steeled her nerves a little more. There were moments when doubt crept in dark, whispering moments where fear threatened to paralyze her. What if Logan found out? What if he retaliated? What if the plan crumbled? But then she would remember the look on his face when he handed her that t-shirt. The look of a man who thought he had already won. And Grace would stiffen her spine and press forward. She was no longer the naive woman hoping love could fix what had been shattered beyond repair. She was a strategist now, a survivor, a fighter. Each night, as Logan snored beside her, unaware that the ground was shifting beneath his feet, Grace lay awake planning the next move, envisioning her freedom like a lighthouse cutting through a storm. There was a long road ahead. Lawyers, divorce proceedings, public scrutiny, perhaps. But Grace didn't flinch from the thought. For the first time in a long time, she could see a real future, one built not on lies and manipulation, but on her own strength. The underdog had been wounded. Now, she was sharpening her claws. Grace had never liked the attic. It was dark, cramped, and smelled of dust and old regrets. Logan had always insisted on keeping important papers up their wills, mortgage documents, tax returns, things they hardly ever needed, but were good to have around. She rarely ventured into the space herself, trusting Logan to handle it. But tonight, she needed answers. Armed with only a small flashlight and a determination that felt like steel in her veins, Grace climbed the narrow steps. The old wooden ladder creaked under her weight, each step echoing loudly in the otherwise silent house. Boxes were stacked haphazardly across the attic floor, their edges worn and sagging from years of neglect. Grace pulled on a pair of gloves and began to sort through them methodically, setting aside old Christmas decorations, high school yearbooks, tax records. Nothing unusual, nothing helpful. She was about to give up when she noticed a battered metal filing cabinet shoved into the far corner, almost hidden behind a tower of old luggage. Unlike the rest of the attic clutter, this cabinet was locked. A sharp prick of suspicion bloomed in her chest. Why lock away old documents unless there was something worth hiding? She rummaged through a nearby drawer and found a ring of keys, dusty and disorganized. After several tries, one clicked the lock open. Grace pulled the heavy drawer open and rifled through its contents. At first, it was what she expected: insurance policies, old business files, family trusts. But tucked at the very back, wrapped in a sheet of yellowed newspaper, was a cardboard box marked simply, "Family, Private." Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside were photo albums, old, faded snapshots that smelled faintly of mildew and forgotten summers. She flipped through them slowly, her heart thudding. There was Logan as a boy, awkward and freckle-faced, smiling stiffly beside Patricia and Donald. But it wasn't Logan who caught her attention. It was another boy, older, taller, with Logan's same sharp jawline, but softer, more genuine eyes. In photo after photo, he stood next to Logan, their arms slung around each other's shoulders, laughing freely, oblivious to the camera. Grace frowned. Who was he? Flipping to the back of one photograph, she found a name written in faded ink. Ethan, summer 1998. Ethan. Her mind reeled. Logan had never mentioned a brother. Not once in 6 years of marriage. No old family stories. No offhand references. Nothing. She dug deeper into the box, her breath quickening with every discovery. There were newspaper clippings, yellowed and fragile, celebrating Ethan's academic achievements. Local student wins full scholarship to Princeton. One headline proclaimed, beneath a black and white photo of the boy she now knew was Ethan. 3 years later, another clipping. Young financial star joins prestigious NYC firm. And then nothing. No wedding announcements. No family holiday updates. No photos beyond that point. It was as if Ethan had been erased from their family history. Grace sat back on her heels, her mind racing. What had happened to him? Why had Logan and Patricia and Donald buried his existence so completely? She dug further and found a final clipping, folded so tightly it had been hidden between the photo albums. A tiny article, almost insignificant, detailing a financial scandal involving the Collins family firm. An anonymous whistleblower. Allegations of embezzlement, tax fraud, accounting irregularities. No names mentioned. No follow-up. Grace's blood ran cold. Had Ethan discovered something? Had he threatened to expose the family and paid the price for it? The possibilities spun through her mind like a raging storm. Maybe Ethan had been cut off. Maybe he had been disowned. Maybe he had been betrayed by the very people she had once desperately sought approval from. A dangerous, exhilarating thought took root. If Ethan was still alive, if he was out there carrying secrets the Collins family wanted buried, he could be the key to everything. Her revenge, her freedom. The attic felt smaller now, claustrophobic with the weight of what she had uncovered. Grace stood, clutching the old photo album to her chest, 1,000 questions burning in her mind. She would find him. She had to, because if there was anyone who understood what it felt like to be discarded by the Collins family, used, manipulated, then erased, it would be Ethan. And maybe, just maybe, he would be willing to help her bring him down. Finding Ethan wasn't as hard as Grace had feared. A simple search on LinkedIn revealed a profile. Ethan Collins, financial consultant, Boston. No mention of family ties, no glowing recommendations from relatives, just a straight-laced resume and a professional headshot, same sharp jawline as Logan, but with warmer, more thoughtful eyes. Her heart pounded as she composed a message, choosing every word carefully. My name is Grace. I believe we have more in common than you realize. I would like to meet and discuss the Collins family. If you're willing. She hit send and closed her laptop, half expecting silence. But the next morning, her phone buzzed. 4 words. Simple. Direct. Cornerstone Cafe. Sunday. Noon. Grace barely slept that weekend, her mind a tangle of nerves and what-ifs. What if Ethan wanted nothing to do with her? What if he was loyal to his family despite everything? What if this was a trap? By the time Sunday arrived, the anxiety had fermented into a restless, jittery energy. She parked her car across the street from Cornerstone Cafe and took a deep breath, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. The little cafe was cozy and sunlit, packed with a lazy hum of weekend customers. Her eyes scanned the room until they landed on him. Ethan sat at a table near the window, a cup of coffee cooling between his hands. He looked up at her entrance, and for a moment, they simply stared at each other, two strangers connected by invisible threads of betrayal and bloodlines. He rose as she approached, extending a hand. "Grace," he said, his voice low, steady. "You look nothing like the picture they keep on the mantel." The comment startled a laugh out of her half-humor, half-disbelief. "They still keep our wedding photo up?" she asked. A ghost of a smile touched Ethan's lips. "Patricia likes to point to it whenever she's explaining how temporary you were meant to be." Grace sat down heavily, the enormity of everything she had been fighting against hitting her anew. "You're not temporary," Ethan said, softer now. "You're just inconvenient. Like I was." The waitress interrupted briefly to take their order. When she left, the real conversation began. Grace told him everything about Logan, the T-shirt, the siphoning of funds, the burner phone, the orchestrated public humiliation. Ethan listened silently, his jaw tightening, his eyes darkening with every new revelation. When she finished, her hands trembling slightly around her coffee cup, he spoke. "I'm sorry," Ethan said simply. But I'm not surprised. He leaned back, his gaze unfocused, as if seeing ghosts only he could recognize. They try to control me too, he admitted. My education, my career, even who I should marry. When I pushed back, they cut me out like I never existed. Grace's heart twisted with empathy. There was so much pain hidden beneath Ethan's calm exterior. So many years of betrayal he had learned to carry alone. They told me you died, Grace blurted, realization dawning. Or worse, they made you invisible. Ethan nodded grimly. Erased. It's what they do to problems they can't manage. For the first time in what felt like forever, Grace didn't feel alone in her fight. Someone else understood not just the surface-level cruelty, but the rot that ran through the Collins family to its core. We were never family to them, she said bitterly. We were chess pieces. Exactly, Ethan agreed, leaning forward, his eyes intense. And now it's time to tip over the board. The bond that sparked between them was immediate, undeniable, not just born from shared wounds, but from the raw, stubborn resilience that neither Patricia nor Donald had managed to crush. Over the next hour, they plotted carefully, sketching a new plan. Ethan had original partnership documents that proved his legal claim to part of the Collins fortune, proof that Patricia and Donald's perfect empire had been built on lies and betrayals. Grace would secure her own evidence, financial statements, witness testimonies, paper trails of Logan's fraud, and together they would expose everything. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice, about breaking free from the shadows the Collins family had cast over their lives. As the sun dipped lower in the sky outside the cafe window, a feeling neither of them expected began to grow, something deeper than partnership, something tentative but undeniable. Trust, connection, hope. When Ethan reached out and gently covered Grace's hand with his, it wasn't romantic in a sweeping, cinematic way. It was quiet, solid, real. I'll help you, he said simply, no matter what it takes. And for the first time in a long, long time, Grace believed it. The days that followed their first meeting blurred into a focused, electric urgency. Grace and Ethan were no longer strangers bound by mutual betrayal. They were a team, partners in a cause larger than either of them had dared to dream before. They met in secret, always careful, always watching. Small coffee shops in neighboring towns, quiet corners of public libraries, anywhere they could blend into the background and plot without attracting attention. The plan they crafted wasn't reckless anger. It was strategic, methodical, as cold and sharp as a scalpel. Hit them where it hurts, Ethan had said, spreading out documents across a battered cafe table late one rainy afternoon. Their money, their reputation, their pride. Grace nodded, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and thrilling anticipation. For so long, she had been on the defensive, reacting to Logan's cruelty, enduring Patricia's icy disdain. Now, for the first time, she was taking control. Ethan produced the originals, the partnership documents, showing he was still a legal owner of 25% of Collins Financial, the family company Patricia and Donald had so carefully curated as their crown jewel. Grace couldn't help but marvel at how casually the Collinses had tried to erase Ethan's existence, never anticipating that he would keep proof tucked safely away for years. And now, with the evidence, Grace had painstakingly gathered, the bank transfers, the burner phone texts, the hotel receipts. They had a 1-2 punch powerful enough to bring the entire Collins empire crashing down. It was risky, dangerous. One wrong move, and they could be buried under legal threats and smear campaigns. But neither of them hesitated. They weren't just fighting for revenge anymore. They were fighting to reclaim their lives. Grace moved carefully at home, playing the part of the dutiful wife even as she prepared for war. Logan remained oblivious, too wrapped up in his plans with Diane and his parents to notice the storm gathering just out of sight. At night, when Logan snored beside her, Grace would lie awake, imagining the moment she would finally confront him, the look of confusion turning to horror as he realized he had underestimated her. She allowed herself to savor the fantasy, not out of cruelty, but because she had earned it. Every insult she had swallowed, every silent Sunday spent alone, every humiliating glance Patricia had thrown her way. It was all fuel now. Meanwhile, Ethan worked his contacts behind the scenes. A sharp, discreet attorney prepared the legal filings, ensuring that when the time came, they could act swiftly and decisively. They timed everything down to the minute. Every document, every confrontation. Grace rehearsed her speech in front of the mirror until it rolled off her tongue without a tremor. She wouldn't simply expose Logan's betrayal, she would dismantle the Collins family's carefully crafted image in one devastating blow. One evening, sitting in Ethan's small, cluttered apartment, they reviewed the final plan one last time. "Are you ready for this?" Ethan asked, his voice low, steady. Grace met his gaze without flinching. "I was born ready," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. The anticipation was electric. It filled the air around them like a summer storm about to break, heavy, tense, exhilarating. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were rewriting the ending. Together. The night before the confrontation, Grace packed a small bag and stashed it in the trunk of her car, essentials only. Important documents, sentimental keepsakes, a change of clothes. She wouldn't be coming back to this chapter of her life once the dust settled. She spent a long time standing in the doorway of her bedroom, staring at the space she had once thought of as safe. It was just a room now, just walls and furniture. The real home she was building, the real future, was waiting beyond all this chaos, bright and fierce and entirely hers. When she finally crawled into bed beside Logan for the last time, he didn't even stir. It struck her then how fitting it was. The man who had spent so long ignoring her wouldn't even notice when she slipped through his fingers. Tomorrow, everything would change. And this time, Grace wasn't afraid. She was ready. The restaurant buzzed with soft conversation and the clinking of glasses, the warm lighting casting a golden glow over the linen-draped tables. It was, by all appearances, a perfect setting for a celebration. But beneath the surface, Grace felt the tension crackling through the air like static before a storm. She sat at the reserved corner table, across from Logan, who wore his most charming smile, the one that used to make her heart race, now only making her skin crawl. Beside him sat Patricia, practically vibrating with smug anticipation, and Donald, wearing the same bored smirk he always did. The champagne had been poured. The appetizers cleared. The moment was drawing near. Grace caught Megan's eye, the waitress who had become her silent ally, and received a nearly imperceptible nod. Everything was in place. Logan tapped his knife against his champagne flute, the sharp clink drawing the attention of nearby diners. Conversations around them hushed as curious eyes turned toward their table. Grace's heart pounded against her ribs, but her face remained serene. She clasped her hands lightly in her lap, her posture relaxed, her gaze steady. "Everyone," Logan said, raising his glass, his voice smooth and projecting just a little louder than necessary. "I'd like to make a special toast." Patricia beamed, practically glowing with cruel excitement. Donald leaned back, smirking as if he were about to enjoy a private joke made public. "To 6 years of marriage," Logan continued, glancing dramatically at Grace, "and to being free, single, and searching." A ripple of shocked murmurs swept through the room. Logan grinned wider, reaching beneath the table to produce a small gift box, handing it to Grace with a flourish. "A little something to remember me by," he said with a wink. All eyes were on her. Grace felt the world slow to a crawl. She imagined what Logan expected: tears, a meltdown, a hasty exit drowned in humiliation. Instead, she smiled. A slow, deliberate smile that made Logan's grin falter, confusion flickering across his face. "Thank you, Logan," Grace said, standing gracefully as she placed the unopened box back on the table. Her voice carried clearly, slicing through the murmuring crowd like a blade. "But before we toast to freedom," she continued, lifting her glass casually, "I have a few announcements of my own." Logan blinked. Patricia stiffened. Donald set his glass down with a faint clink. Grace turned to the room, her posture regal, every inch the woman in control. "First," she said, her tone light, almost conversational, "I'd like to thank Logan for inspiring me to take a good, hard look at our financial situation. She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder, sliding it onto the table with a soft thud. Turns out, she said, while Logan was planning this adorable little stunt, he was also systematically draining our joint accounts, about $80,000 worth, to be precise. A gasp rippled through the room. Patricia's mouth tightened into a hard line. Donald shifted uncomfortably. Logan opened his mouth to protest, but Grace cut him off with a sweet smile. "Don't worry, dear," she said, almost purring. "I've already secured my half, along with documentation of every withdrawal you made without my consent." Logan's face turned a shade darker. Patricia leaned forward, her voice a hiss. "You're making a scene?" Grace turned to her, her smile never wavering. "Oh, I'm not done yet." She pulled out another set of papers. "I've also sold the house," she said brightly. "Got a fantastic offer, too, well over asking price. Funny how hot the market is right now." Logan surged to his feet, knocking his chair backward. "You can't sell the house without my signature." Grace cocked her head. "You really should have read the stack of documents you signed 3 weeks ago." A ripple of laughter, shocked, delighted, moved through the surrounding diners. Patricia's face flushed an ugly red. Grace placed one final envelope on the table, this one marked with a bold, official-looking seal. "And for the grand finale," she said, her voice dropping just enough to pull every listening ear closer, "I'd like to introduce someone very special." At her signal, the restaurant door opened. Ethan stepped inside, dressed in a sharp suit, his presence commanding immediate attention. The resemblance between him and Logan was unmistakable. The same bone structure, the same piercing eyes. But where Logan's gaze was cold and calculating, Ethan's was steady and fierce. A collective murmur rolled through the restaurant as Ethan approached the table. Logan paled. Patricia's hand flew to her throat. "Ethan," Donald breathed, as if seeing a ghost. "Surprise," Grace said sweetly. Ethan placed a thick legal document on the table in front of Patricia and Donald. "These," he said coolly, "are the original partnership agreements for Collins Financial. Turns out, I still own a quarter of the company." Gasps and whispers filled the air as realization dawned on the Collins family. "But don't worry," Grace added, her voice practically dripping with satisfaction. "We're just getting started." She turned back to the crowd of stunned diners, lifting her glass. "And lastly," she said, savoring the moment, "I have one more announcement." She placed a hand gently over her stomach, her fingers splayed protectively. "I'm pregnant." The restaurant erupted into stunned silence. "And the father," Grace continued, turning to meet Ethan's steady gaze, "is standing right beside me." The explosion of reactions was immediate. Gasps, murmurs, heads whipping between Grace and Ethan, between Logan's gaping mouth and Patricia's horrified expression. Logan stumbled backward, knocking into another table. Patricia swayed her seat, looking moments from fainting. Donald's face turned an alarming shade of purple. Grace simply smiled, a smile of triumph, of freedom. "For 6 years," she said, her voice strong and clear, "I fought to be part of this family. I see now I was aiming far too low." She placed her glass down carefully, took Ethan's hand, and turned without another word. Together, they walked out of the restaurant, into the cool night air, leaving behind the shattered remains of the Collins family's perfect facade. As they disappeared into the night, the crowd inside slowly began to clap. Hesitant at first, then growing louder, a spontaneous ovation for the woman who refused to be broken. Grace didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her new life was waiting, and this time, she was walking into it on her own terms. The cool evening air wrapped around Grace like a balm as she stepped out of the restaurant, Ethan's hand securely clasped in hers. Behind them, the muted uproar from the Collins family faded into nothing, just angry voices lost in the night. For the first time in what felt like forever, Grace inhaled a full, steady breath. It tasted like freedom. They didn't speak right away. They didn't have to. The weight of what they had just done, what they had survived, settled between them. But it wasn't heavy. It was cleansing. It was final. Grace glanced over at Ethan. In the soft streetlights, He looked more at ease than she had ever seen him, like a man who had finally set down a burden he had carried for far too long. She realized she felt the same. "You okay?" he asked gently, squeezing her hand. Grace nodded, a small, real smile tugging at her lips. "I'm more than okay," she said. "I'm free." The word rolled off her tongue like a prayer, like a declaration. Free. No longer tied to Logan's manipulations. No longer crushed under Patricia's cold judgment or Donald's sneering disdain. No longer trapped in a life built on lies. Her life was hers again. They walked slowly down the quiet street, past shuttered storefronts and glowing windows, savoring the simplicity of the moment. No more secrets. No more games. Just two people who had fought like hell to reclaim themselves and won. For a brief second, Grace's mind flickered back to the girl. She had been the girl who had desperately tried to fit into a mold someone else had built, who had convinced herself that enduring pain was the same as loving deeply. She sent that girl a silent farewell. She was not that woman anymore. She was stronger, wiser, and she was not alone. As they reached Grace's car, Ethan hesitated, turning toward her fully. "You don't have to go back," he said, voice rough with emotion. "Not even for a night. You're safe now. You're home now, if you want to be." Tears pricked at Grace's eyes, but this time they weren't born from sadness. They were tears of overwhelming gratitude, of relief, of something that felt suspiciously like hope blooming where bitterness had once rooted itself. She stepped into his arms, resting her forehead against his chest, feeling his steady heartbeat under her palms. "I don't want to go back," she whispered. They stood there for a long moment, just breathing, just existing in a space where neither of them had to be anything other than exactly who they were. Finally, Grace pulled back and looked up at him, her hand drifting down to rest lightly over her stomach. "Our baby deserves better," she said. "We all do." Ethan smiled, then a real, unguarded smile that lit up his entire face. "And that's exactly what we're going to build," he said. The future stretched out before them, vast, unknown, a little terrifying, but for the first time, it was their future to shape. No strings, no expectations, no lies, just love and freedom. As they drove away from the restaurant, from the wreckage of the life Grace had once thought she wanted, she didn't feel sadness. She didn't mourn what she was leaving behind. Instead, she felt a thrilling rush of joy, pure and unapologetic. She reached over and laced her fingers with Ethan's, laughing softly as they sped down the open road toward a new life bursting with possibility. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, bright, breathtaking, and completely, beautifully hers. And Grace, at last, was exactly where she was meant to be. Life often tests us in ways we never anticipate, through betrayal, loss, and the crumbling of the very foundations we trusted most. But as Grace's journey reminds us, there's a profound strength hidden in survival. Even when everything familiar falls away, we are not broken beyond repair. We are given the chance to rebuild, to rediscover who we are beyond the titles and expectations others have placed upon us. Grace's story teaches us that self-respect, dignity, and hope are not luxuries reserved for the young. They are essentials we can claim at any stage of life. It is never too late to stand up, to protect ourselves, and to choose authenticity over appearances. Often, the most devastating endings are the ones that clear the way for new beginnings, brighter, freer, and truer to the soul we carry within us. Trust is precious, but even when it is betrayed, it does not diminish our worth. Love, too, can bloom anew, stronger, wiser, and deeper when rooted in shared truths rather than illusions. For those who have weathered many storms, Grace's journey is a powerful reminder. Resilience is timeless, and the courage to begin again is one of life's greatest gifts. We are never too old to demand better, never too late to walk toward a future where joy and peace are not stolen, but earned and deserved. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to Stories TH for more incredible stories and tips on overcoming life's challenges. Your support means everything to us.